Apologies, Chair. Thank you, and thanks to all the witnesses, and Anna, thank you for being here today with us, and for your strength and courage. And I suppose I just want to acknowledge that, and all of the survivors and their families. And I'm very conscious that this part of of our session today is very technical and can seem a bit impersonal, and we're not trying to be. We just want to really understand this and get it right. So apologise if it seems cold and insensitive. It's really not intended to be. My first question is for Niamh. Niamh, you spoke about the humanitarian forensic approach, and you spoke about considerable time and expertise being required. And I took from your contribution as well your particular involvement and direct experience in Tuam. But I wonder if you could give us your view on, we need to look at this beyond Tuam, and we need to look at this, I suppose, from the full state's perspective. Can you give the committee some view on the expertise, the scale of expertise, the scale of time as well that will be required, and the process that will be involved? And I suppose most importantly, the time that's going to be involved in terms of the survivors and their relatives being given some answers, and also how, as it's obviously going to be, the work will be conducted over a prolonged period of time, what is the best practice in terms of communicating progress over a long period of time to survivors?
Mute again there, Dr. McCullough. Yeah. You're still on mute.
My apologies.
No, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. Your last question first. Most of the organisations that undertake similar work would have a family liaison officer who is constantly in communication with survivors and victims, and that's essential. And that was something that was identified, in the first step of the expert technical group report. Recommendations from all across the globe with similar scenarios have been communication with survivors and victims' families is crucial. It's the crucial first step, and it needs to be an open door. So what was the first question you asked me? Sorry.
Well, I actually asked you to talk us through the process, and particularly from like how long and the scale of expertise that the state is going to be required to put in place to ensure that a humanitarian forensic approach can be adopted successfully.
Well, I suppose I can only speak to I can't speak to the lab processes in terms of DNA once that starts, but in terms of a pre-lab procedure, the expert technical group looking specifically at Tuam, which is, of course, probably the most complex site that the legislation will have to deal with. The timeframe that we put forward for this was a 6 to 12 month period on site. And the time that would be required in the lab for the analysis of the remains, not DNA analysis, but that wasn't possible to determine because we don't know the number of individuals that you're dealing with, the number of individuals that will be recovered from that scenario. So it's unfortunately an exact answer to your question for each process isn't determinable at the moment, simply because we don't know how many individuals we're dealing with.
Yeah, actually, that your answer is great. I mean, it gives us a guidance. I didn't expect exact. I'm actually curious, though. You say that Tuam is most complex. I actually had thought that maybe in some respects Tuam would be more straightforward than other sites where there's dispute over or debate over where the actual burial sites are.
From a recovery perspective, Tuam is the single most complex of the sites that we have come across to date, simply because you're dealing with 20 chambers. Each chamber is over 2.7 metres to the base where the remains are from the surface, and each chamber is approximately 0.8 metres. I suppose it stuck in feet, it's 9 feet by 1 foot wide. So it's extremely challenging conditions, and the remains themselves, of course, being having elements of mixing as opposed to the single graves that you are likely to come across at other sites like Besborough, and like what we the types of graves that we came across at Shanross Abbey. They were individual graves as opposed to this scenario where you have many individuals interred together in very inaccessible chambers.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask Carl a question? Chair, have I got a minute?
Are you okay, Senator? Sorry, I'm saying, yeah.
So I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, you go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, I thank you, Carla, and I was listening there. When you were talking about, and we all recognise the human rights violations that have occurred, and we all want desperately to try and right the wrongs, and accepting that we will never be able to completely achieve that. But what is the best guidance you can give us, I suppose, in terms of listening to the survivors, and some survivors who do not want their babies excavated? How do we best reconcile addressing the previous human rights violations, but also respecting the rights of the mothers who don't want their babies excavated?
That's an incredibly difficult question to ask, and I wouldn't like to put myself in the position or suggest that I speak on behalf of all of those mothers and victims, as quite clearly I don't and I can't. But I think what the question does demonstrate is the reasons why there needs to be a proper and thought out truth and reconciliation process for what went on in the mother and baby homes. The Commission of Inquiry was not that. And this legislation isn't that at all. It's a piecemeal approach to a tragedy that people need to actually sit down and deal with properly, because at the moment it isn't being. And those that have died and those that are still alive are all being done a disservice currently. So as much as I can't answer the question properly, it does throw up this other issue, and it shows the importance of that proper process to hear everybody's views and to make decisions taking into account those views. Whereas, as I say, currently this legislation does not do that and doesn't really go anywhere near far enough. And conversely, the Commission of Inquiry didn't do that either, as per the reports of many of those that sought to testify and give evidence, and hence the reason it's been criticised so widely.